call to the end of the year debate between Madison Liberty, College Republicans, and the College Democrats. We're going to begin by having a debate between three already prepared questions by the three parties. And then afterwards, we're going to move into a more interactive discussion environment in which I will be reading off some of the questions that we have here that you guys have already written down on index cards. If you have any questions that arise throughout the debate directed to any of the parties about what somebody said, please save them for after we've discussed the three questions, and then by all means, you're more than welcome to voice them. And we will be beginning by talking about the first question, which was proposed by the College Republicans, namely, what is your proposal for solving the national debt crisis? Excuse me.
Well, first of all, we would like to thank PASO for hosting this event and monitoring for us, and we'd like to thank the College Democrats and Madison Liberty for joining us today. When it comes to the national debt, we take a free market approach in that we believe a free market economy works best. Currently, the national debt is around 16 trillion. It's approaching 17 trillion. That's 50,000 per citizen. I don't know about you guys, but I don't have an extra 50,000 lying around in my bank account. So when approaching the national debt, we need to look at tax cuts. Tax cuts actually put more money into the economy. They give the individual more money, and that individual can spend the money, thus creating jobs. The more people spend, the more jobs that are created, and then the government in turn gets the revenue from this spending.
Which direction are we going, by the way?
I'm sorry, because we forgot to clarify this. We're moving in, let's say we're moving in this direction, clockwise.
So, like, are we next? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that.
Like, I'm just like,
Yeah.
I'm saying it's in
in
a
line.
linear movement here.
All right,
I'm sorry.
no, it's fine. Unemployment is currently at 7.7%, and that's a huge problem for the United States, obviously, because as college students, we obviously want to get jobs when we go out of college. That's why we came here. We believe that a balanced budget amendment should be put into the Constitution so that it makes the government more responsible to the individual, and it also makes the government hopefully more transparent, so you can see where your taxpayer money is being spent. We believe that tax rates are currently too high, like the high corporate tax rate is the highest in the world, and that's crippling job creation and thus crippling our economy.
Hi, I'm Helen Chabut. I'm Vice President of Madison Liberty. Yes, thank you guys for helping out with moderating the debate. We believe that the most obvious way to take care of the debt problem is to make cuts to the biggest unsustainable programs, which are Medicare, Social Security, and the military. And I think we can all agree that those programs are out of control right now in terms of how much they're spending. And before we can really talk about tax increases, I think the federal government needs to demonstrate that it can have more responsible spending habits before we entrust them with more money. The most painless way to get out of this cycle of deficits that we've had for the past decade or so would be growing the economy, which we would agree some tax cuts would be necessary for that. But more importantly, we could get rid of some of the trade protections and measures that are in place right now and mandatory certifications for a lot of jobs. Those are keeping a lot of people out of the job market. In contrast, the most painful way is probably through inflation, which is a policy our government is pursuing right now. Inflation is pretty much just a regressive tax on the poorest of Americans. By printing more money, it just causes the value of money to go down for everyone. And for poor people who need that money most for food and other necessities, that's really, it hits them the hardest.
I'll just add really quick though. A lot of times this is framed as a budget problem, that there's some sort of mathematical solution we can have, or we have this sort of sequester talk every few months. We really see this problem as much deeper and systemic than that. We don't have a problem with the math of it. We have a problem with how many obligations our government is tied into financially. So that's our path for reducing the debt, just reducing the number of interests that are directly funded by the government and that are reliant on government money in order to function.
Okay, so I have a couple, the Democrats have a couple problems with what's been said. First of all, trickle-down economics doesn't really work the way that people like to think that it does. It doesn't really do what people want. But also you said that Social Security was a big contributor to the national debt, which actually isn't true. It's about it's less than 1% of our national debt. But Medicare and the militaries are definitely like amounting, and there are some changes that need to be made with Medicare spending because it is definitely getting out of control. However, a lot of the elderly do rely on Medicare, and we can't just take that away from people.
The thing with the tax code too is the Democratic Party is also in favor of lowering taxes on the middle class and low-income Americans, and then raising them on the 1% in order to pay for the tax cuts on the middle class. Because the fact is, the middle class and the lower class, they're the majority of Americans. We're the consumers, we're the people who are out buying things, spending money. So if you cut taxes for them, they're the ones who have more money to put into the economy. Cutting taxes for people in the top 1%, making hundreds of thousands, millions, billions of dollars, they're not the consumers of the country. They're 1% of the population who use their income for investments and to make money on capital gains, and they're not the consumers that are driving the economy. It's the middle class who's the majority of the population.
And I mean, we do think that spending obviously needs to be cut. We want a balanced approach to this, tax hikes, like you said, on the 1%, and then cut spending, obviously, because that's clearly the only way that this can get done. I mean, there is no way that we could raise enough money through taxes to fully cut the debt, and there's not a way for us to reasonably cut our spending to do the same.
Okay, at this
Well,
point.
I never got to respond. I thought we
Oh,
started.
no, we're getting
Yeah.
the rebuttal now.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay, at this point, I'd just like, don't worry. At this point, I'd like to say that because the college Republicans were the ones who prepared this question, are the ones who begun debating about this question, they will now have a 1-minute rebuttal.
All right. Well, my name's Cole. I do live in Elkton, Virginia, which is not far from here, and I'm a sophomore here at JMU. I didn't grow up with everything. I do have my dad in the crowd. Didn't always have, the nice new cars or the newest clothes, but I was never, worried about whether I had food on the table or a house to come home to or loving parents. But these times in our economy really do put a strain on households. We just heard a statement from down on the other side to the left of you, is we only want to raise taxes on the 1%. Well, raise your hand if you've ever driven a car or ride the bus every day. Well, guess what? Those things take gasoline. We have the Democratic Party today that wants to raise a gasoline tax, which affects all Americans, especially the ones at the bottom. Because who's the one who can afford the hybrid? It's the richest. And they'll be okay. Don't worry about the millionaires. They'll be all right. They were okay in Soviet Russia. They were okay in Cuba. And guess what? Even with Detroit falling to its knees, they're still okay up there, and they have front row seats to the Pistons games.
About 10 seconds.
Well, for my 10 seconds, I'll go ahead and say this. If you don't think a gasoline tax is a tax on the poorest, you're out of your mind.
Stimulate the economy by creating jobs. How do you do that? You relieve taxes on corporations, small business owners, the people that create jobs in the United States.
All right. Moving on to our next prepared question, which was prepared by the Democrats. Am I correct?
Yep.
Yes? All right, well, this kind of goes against what you're, don't worry about it. Namely, do you support the repeal of the Defense of Marriage Act? Sorry, you guys were-
Absolutely.
Sorry.
We don't think it's the government should have the right to tell one individual who they can love or who they can marry or not, because the fact is that there's a decent-sized percentage of our population of people who want to marry so they could get some of the same legal benefits that come with marriage between a man and a woman. Even though you're going to hear the argument that it's traditional America or that a homosexual couple can't reproduce. But the fact is, you don't get married to reproduce. You get married because you love someone, you want to spend the rest of your life with them, you want to start a family with them. And a homosexual couple can do the same exact thing as a heterosexual couple. The only difference is it's not their biological children. There's not a fact that these couples can't raise normal children, or their kids suffer from social disorders, or they're all going to turn out gay, or this whole homophobic culture is going to take over our society.
I don't have anything to add.
Okay, it would be your turn next.
Today in the Republican Party, there's a big shift. There's some on this side that believe that marriage, to uphold DOMA with the Republicans in Congress of the 90s, and then you also have a generation of more liberty-minded Republicans that believe that marriage is no business of the government. And I believe that marriage is no business of the government, of the federal government. DOMA is a big federal program. DOMA is a big federal government bureaucracy. that the Republicans fight against. Now, that's not to say that Cole Trower doesn't believe, or any of you don't believe, that marriage is between one man and one woman, or however you believe it. But we do have a free society, and I don't want government into my marriage, hopefully when I get married. And that's really what we're worried about here, is government intrusion. People are going to have relationships with who they want. The government's not going to stop them. But to recognize marriage, I believe, and also a large portion of the Republican Party believes, that this is a 10th Amendment issue. This is not for the federal courts to decide and to make legislation from the bench of the Supreme Court. This is for states' rights. If Massachusetts wants to have it, Massachusetts can have same-sex marriage. If Oklahoma doesn't want same-sex marriage and they vote for traditional marriage, then they should be able to have it. We, as a populace, have views and different opinions that vary throughout the country. Representation of the locality is what I'm for.
Like Cole said, this isn't a federal government issue. This is a state issue. People in North Dakota are not going to feel the same as people in Massachusetts. Why? Because they're different and they have different opinions. And they should be able to express those opinions through their elected officials and through their individual votes. Hence, we believe that the issue of marriage, which we do define in the traditional manner, is a state matter.
Okay, well, it's two ways to approach this. And first of all, I'm glad to hear both clubs express some concerns about DOMA, because I would point out that it was passed with bipartisan support, signed into law by President Clinton. So both parties have been with this for a long time, and they have suddenly realized that something is wrong here. And I think that shows that these are parties that are built off of social acceptability and what is politically convenient. And at this point in time, people have finally come around to accepting homosexuality and gay marriage in a level that they haven't before. And so now the parties are moving. But if you look at the Libertarian Party, we're not a party founded on social acceptability or politics. We're founded on individual rights. So I don't need you to prove to me that your lifestyle is okay before I respect your rights. That's why the Libertarian Party has supported gay marriage since its inception in 1972. It's more than 20 years before I think any Democrat even started talking about it, about 30 years before it switched to over half of any of the major parties that started to think about that. But whether you look at it from a policy perspective or from a legal perspective, I think you have to respect people's rights to choose to marry whom they want. And on a policy level, first of all, on this idea of redefining marriage, I always hear that we need to support traditional marriage. This is far from the first time that policy has adjusted to changes in social views about marriage. At one point in American history, divorce was illegal. At another point, interracial marriage was illegal. But in all these cases, we came around and realized, wait a minute, that wasn't right. And so we got out of the way. And saying it's the 10th Amendment is just punting it away. You know, you can say people in North Dakota aren't going to have the same views as people in Washington. But why should somebody in a little town in the northern part of North Dakota have the same views about this as somebody in a little town in the western part of North Dakota? I mean, what is the standard? What size, geography, or people is it that can legitimately take away your rights? This is why it's important to have a perspective on these policies that's grounded in respect for an individual and his rights, not what's politically acceptable. We would sit here and say we just don't have the power to get in the way of two people's rights to contract a marriage if they want. It's a constitutional right through the 9th Amendment and the 14th, and we don't think the government has any business getting in the way of two consensual adults marrying or having any sort of relationship that they wish to have.
Okay. The Democrats now have a 1-minute rebuttal. Government regulating marriage is intrusive on any level, state or federal. It shouldn't be up to states, it should be up to couples, whether or not they're in love with each other and whether or not they want to take this step in their relationship.
And also this idea that the nuclear family is the epitome of like our American society. I mean, that's not true. Our society was built on a bunch of different cultures coming together. That way we can live together as Americans. So the fact that there are people protesting gay marriage because they're saying that it's going to deteriorate our society because we were built on a man and a wife and the children as a family, that's ridiculous. Because American society, we were built on moving forward, adapting to all these different cultures in our society. That way we can live together as Americans, not as a heterosexual nation.
50% of Americans believe that gay marriage should be legal, and I'm sure that some of them live in the Dakotas.
And 38%.
Okay, and now we're going to move on to our third prepared question, prepared by Madison Liberty, namely, what is your position on the use of drones in foreign policy?
Before we get into the question there, I want to make sure everyone is clear that libertarians are not against drones as a tool of war, the new kind of war technology that could eventually save lives and that it allows us to target specific people. But we have to recognize that drone strikes are an act of war, and that constitutionally only Congress has the power to declare war. And right now, they haven't done so, but we're still conducting drone strikes on all parts of the world. I think the biggest problem with this is probably how we use signature strikes in many countries across the Arab world. Signature strikes are when the government decides that any man who's of military age and is in the general vicinity of something that might be a terrorist camp, that those people are terrorists. And so when we count up the dead from these drone strikes, those people are automatically assumed to be military combatants who are directly opposing the United States. Even with that, though, we still know that American drone strikes have killed more than 400 children. I doubt any of those were military combatants, toddlers. And I think that we need to take these losses of life very seriously and not just allow them to be administered by the president or one department without congressional oversight. And finally, I think that when talking about drone strikes or any kind of unconstitutional act of war in other countries, we need to consider the impact of blowback, which is that by killing people in these countries without declaring war and without many of them being military combatants, that we might be creating enemies in countries that might otherwise want to be our friends.
There hasn't been a formal decree of war by Congress since World War II. Vietnam, Korea, Iraq, Afghanistan, those were all acts by the president acting as commander-in-chief who was moving the army into battle. So the use of drones is totally appropriate because not only have they been proven effective, we're still involved in a war, whether it was decreed or not. The targets that these combatants, that these drones are fighting, they're terrorists. They're noted terrorists against the United States. They're on the president's kill list, as I'm sure you guys have all heard. And they've proven effective. Of course, there's going to be casualties, and there's going to be that in the war, no matter how you fight it. Whether it's on the ground, whether it's general infantrymen fighting a battle in the desert, or when you can save the life of an American by having him fly a remote control plane from somewhere in the United States or overseas to protect the border. The Democratic Party fully supports the use of drones.
All right. Well, whenever someone talks about drones, we always, we're always hesitant. Are they being used on U.S. soil, foreign soil? And this is obviously on foreign soil. These people who we are sending drones after, they are enemy combatants. They are terrorists who believe that we are the infidel. They believe that we are scum of the earth and we should be wiped out. Everyone in this room, Republican or Democrat, you are the enemy to them. And this is one thing that I think my colleagues here fail to realize is that these people are going to be targeted and they're going to be taken out, whether it is by a robot drone or by a man-driven aircraft, either one. A man-flown aircraft, are you going to go and worry about blowback from a foreign country who bombs our embassies and burns our flags? Or are you going to worry about blowback from a United States citizen from Norfolk, Virginia, whose husband or wife just got sent overseas to Iraq to bomb somebody when we could have sent a drone over and he gets shot out of the plane? I'm more worried about the blowback from sending U.S. citizens and soldiers and mothers and fathers overseas to blow up these combatants. Why not send a drone? We have the technology. That's why we invest. Innovation. We're the most innovative country in the world. We have drones. We can use them and we can save lives, but not on the United States soil, only on foreign soil.
Like Cole said, there's certainly a time and a place for drones. We believe that the United States has to have a vigilant policy in national defense. We recognize that there are threats out there, and these threats are legitimate. And in certain cases, drones are necessary. Are there costs from drones? Yes, but I'd rather those costs not be in American lives.
This has been a deeply disappointing question for me to hear such ringing endorsement for completely unchecked federal power. I mean, think about if an American got killed by a drone from another country. I mean, wouldn't you be upset? I mean, we're basically saying that we can kill anyone anywhere on the planet anytime the president wants to. I mean, I don't think that's what a free country is made of. It's with a president who, without no oversight, no rules from Congress, no judicial courts you can go to, can just kill somebody. And we talk about the combatants that we're going after. But there's not a lot of evidence that we're really being all that careful in who we go after. We regularly bombed funerals, weddings. We bomb places after we bomb them in order to get people who are going back to help survivors. And to name one particular case, there was someone who had some links to Al-Qaeda named Anwar al-Awlaki, and we killed him in a drone strike. Just so happens that he had a son who we hadn't seen for years, Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki, and now he's a U.S. citizen and a 16-year-old. And even though his dad was already dead, the White House ordered a separate drone strike to go kill him. No connections to terrorism, born to the wrong parents. And when reporters asked people on the Obama campaign trail about this, they asked Robert Gibbs, he said, well, I think if they were really concerned about their son's safety, then the parents would have acted more responsibly. Is that a moral policy? Have better parents.
All right, at
Can I
this
take a
point,
minute to respond to that?
I need to, okay. One moment. Okay, so, at this point in time, do you guys have anything left to say? If you would like, you can say something. You have about a 30-second time limit because then we're going to move on to interactive.
We all feel for the casualties that are lost with drones. Obviously, their action is unintended. But the part you're missing is that this is war. This is going to happen no matter how we do it. There's no way to know what these people are doing if they're plotting against Al-Qaeda.
And so we can bomb anyone, anywhere, all over the globe because we're at war with this terrorist group that
We're not, but
Pretty much crippled.
we're bombing terrorists. We're not out there looking to blow up a
And innocent
school or a
people.
funeral. That's going to happen in war. That's what war is. Well, that's a whole other issue.
Well, I think the discussion, I think that the conflict here is whether the president has the power to declare war or not, and that's getting mixed up with foreign drone strikes, and there's three different issues getting merged into one. And the debate's getting a little confused. The debate is this: should we use drones on foreign soil? Let us not forget where we were on September 11th. Let us not forget when those towers fell, how we felt. I remember, along with I'm sure a lot of folks here in the front row here and students, remember being in elementary school that day and wondering, are we safe? Are we okay? Are we going to get bombed? Who's next? A lot of people here from Northern Virginia. The Pentagon gets attacked. I mean, let us not forget what these people think of us. We are the scum. We are the infidel. We are the swine. Let us drive them into the sea, they say of us. We have to stand up for freedom. We have to stand up for liberty. We're not advocating blowing people up on the United States soil or blowing up weddings. But what we are is we are here to protect our families, and we are here to protect our homeland. And we need to thank our veterans every day they come home. And if there are any veterans in the audience today, I'd like to say thank you on behalf of the JMU College Republicans for your service. And let's not confuse the debate of who can declare power and whether we're going to use drones on Afghanistan on people who bomb our embassies and burn our flag and chant death to America.
I totally agree with you. I really do. And I think
That's a first.
But the thing is, you're so concerned about killing 5 or 6 people at a funeral and you're totally
it's been
disregarding.
thousands of civilians, actually. Yes,
It was-
it's thousands of
right.
civilians, over 400
But these are people who
Just nonsense.
these are people who took out 2,996 innocent lives on a
No,
single
they're not.
Tuesday
They're
morning.
innocent civilians. Those people
Okay.
are flames of the innocent died. You can't blame an entire portion of the world for one
No,
terrorist
but
attack. And it is a terrible idea to craft a policy at the moment when you are most terrified, most angry, and most unsure of what to do.
That's like saying these people.
Well, what do we
should
wait
have
another
been
year
shooting at
after they bomb us again to change our policy?
Okay, at this point, I'm going to interrupt. At this point, I'm going to interrupt. On this topic about drones, does anybody in the audience have a question that they would like to ask? No?
Well,
Yes,
what
sir.
about the use of drones in this country?
College
We deal with
Republicans is
that.
against it.
Everyone is against that, right?
Terrorists are terrorists, and if people are sitting here today saying that there are not American citizens that are not terrorists, then you are living a lie. Because there are people in this country that are terrorists, and we shouldn't be talking about drone strikes like they're not directed, like, we should be worried about the targets and getting terrorists out of our country just as much as we should about eliminating those overs.
How would you feel if your neighbor was a terrorist and they bombed your house?
I hope that they would tell me that they were my neighbor was a terrorist, so I could tell.
But they're not going to be taken out by drones. Is the thing. This wasn't really an issue until
Are they
Rand
really?
Paul
Can we
started
really?
this filibuster.
I think
Well, the next day, Eric Holder came back and he said the president doesn't have the authority.
We should believe everything Eric Holder says.
Yeah, and they also specified that they did have the authority to do it when there are enemy combatants, which is a definition that's left entirely up to the administration. So again, it's not really that much protection to say, no, we only use this weapon against a subset of people whose definition we arbitrarily decide.
Also, we definitely believe that the founders had it right when they guaranteed American citizens and arguably all people the rights to due process, trial by jury before they get a drone.
Except
And
those
how
are,
party does think
those
that-
rights don't apply to acts of
To
war.
bring, I'm sorry, one moment, to bring just a little bit of organization into our debate here. Let's move, again, in more of a linear process here. So we'll start with the Republicans. You can say what you want to say. We're going to move down a little bit in response to this question, just so it doesn't get too confusing. All right?
All right, we are against the use of drones on American soil. We have more resources in our country to go ahead and arrest people. These people, they are individuals. As American citizens, they have rights guaranteed to them in the Constitution, as the Libertarians just stated. Cole?
During this last exchange, you just saw a clear contrast of what the two different parties, Republican and Democrat, and Libertarian as well, view on this issue. It comes down to this. The Democratic Party believes that the government is right, they're always right, and that your liberties and your freedoms can be sacrificed by someone that sits on Capitol Hill that's never known you, that's never spoke to you, and never given you a shot. That's who determines, makes all these laws. With health care, with spending, with education, with drones. This is bureaucracy's grown out of control, and with drones, the Democratic Party saying that you can bomb U.S. citizens. Are you kidding me? Whatever happened to a trial by jury? When our founding fathers came here, they set up a Bill of Rights. In this Constitution, which I wonder if anybody on the Democratic Party has in their coat pocket, what it is a right to trial by jury. And that's what's so great about our country is we can go on trial and be upheld and protected by the law. And if you're guilty, you'll be charged. And if you're innocent, then you will be relieved of the charges. That's what we are here for. We're not some kind of savage beast that just say, we don't like what he believes. Because here's the thing, if George Bush was president, they'd say, oh, it's terrible, whoa, why me? But since Obama's the president, they say, well, it's okay then. We need to stand up for the Constitution no matter who's the president.
Libertarians?
I love the point about trial by jury. It's exactly correct. If the government were to accuse you of murdering somebody, they would have to inform you of the charges, allow you to find some defense, and go through this whole spelled out judicial process to convict you. That should be the same if you're accused of something like blowing up a building, because defining something as a terrorist act, again, is power that's in the government's hands, and they can wield it to their advantage to define acts that they want in a terrorist manner. But talking about trial by jury, I mean, what is it that makes us deserving of a trial when we're accused of this sort of act, but someone who's not born in the U.S. is not deserving? I mean, the only difference is where they were born. So that's privilege from birth, and I think that's something that we should be aware of. A lot of times this drone issue gets pushed to the side because we all tend to be privileged. We're not people that really have to worry about that. We're not in the Middle East. Pretty much these targets are exclusively Muslim. If you're a nice white kid named Mike or Sarah, you really don't have much to worry about when it comes to drone strikes. So I think we have to look at this issue also through the prism of privilege. We expect all these due process protections anytime we're accused of something. How come a kid who was born in Pakistan gets no rights at all? If you say it's war, okay, but when is this war going to end? How do we decide when it ends? If it's a war that goes on forever, all over the globe, then you're just handing the government a blank check to do whatever it wants for eternity, and I'm not willing to do that.
It's funny to hear you label like all these targets, they're typically Muslim when you're just doing me grief for saying you can't blame a whole part of the world. You just did the same thing.
No, I blamed our government for targeting them. I didn't say they deserved to be targeted.
Okay. And the reason these rights don't apply to non-citizens are because they're non-citizens. The Bill of Rights is for American citizens.
So you're better than them because you were born here.
Well, no, because it's in America. It's for American citizens. It's not for
It's actually just
a
for
foreign terrorist in America. And the only reason people fear the threat of drone strikes in the U.S. is for domestic terrorists. There's no Al-Qaeda in America who's plotting against us. They're overseas. That's why we're fighting over there and not here.
All right, at this point, interrupting again, are there any other questions from the audience concerning any, would you like me to read it off, ma'am? All right, during which question was this made?
I don't remember, but somebody brought the topic up.
Okay. This is completely off topic from the drones, and we are now talking about Medicare. Namely, what is the solution to solving Medicare without cutting the money? This money, the money, sorry. I'm sorry, I should allow you to have some order here. We'll begin with the College Republicans right here.
All right, you take a free market approach to healthcare. That's one of my favorite things. You make it more competitive. You give the individual a better quality of healthcare and lower costs. You make doctors who are bad doctors responsible for their actions because you as an individual won't go to a bad doctor. You'll go to a better doctor. And that's how you solve the healthcare crisis. You privatize it. You put it back into your hands.
Well, with the question we're dealing with Medicaid, there's a big
Medicare.
Medicare. Okay. Well, with Medicare, it's the government bureaucracy is the number one thing that I look at, and the loss of individual liberties. Choosing your doctor. We can even look at Obamacare. I mean, we're getting ready to be put, our seniors and our older, our grandparents are going to get put in front of a death panel of 15 unelected bureaucrats to decide whether you get funding or not. I mean, my grandpa, he just went to the hospital 2 days ago with dementia. And he came out of it before. 10 years ago, he had dementia, but he came out of it, he was okay. And, he's 95 years old. He's lived a good life. He's got some nice grandkids. He's been retired since he was 65 or 60 years old. Oh, we'll go ahead and not give him the money, just cut the tube and let somebody else have it. But the problem is that the bureaucracy has too much control. Doctors, there's no reason to be a doctor anymore. Anybody in here that's going to be a doctor, abort the mission. Get out. You're not going to make any money. There's no money. And with Obamacare, doctors go to medical school for 8 years. There's no profit to be made. We've got our grandparents are on 37 medications. They've got a pill box bigger than Snoop Dogg's cocaine bottle. We've got seniors on medicine. While it is a funny comment, it's reality. That's why it's so funny, because every joke has a little bit of reality to it. And guess what? We have to, Medicare Part D, that's just a big increasement of the entitlement drug program, and it's got to go. We need less government, not more of it.
Okay, moving on to Libertarian.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the policy of it. Of course, Medicare is the health insurance that every American citizen gets when they reach a certain age, typically 65. But from the demographic changes we see in the country, the first obvious little adjustment you could make if you didn't want to get rid of Medicare entirely is to raise that age up somewhat, and that would relieve you of some costs. And also recognize the hopeful fact that people should be getting healthier and living longer lives as time goes on, so there shouldn't be as much need for it to cover as many people. Also, Medicare's reimbursement structure doesn't make a whole lot of sense. They try to pay for new treatments as opposed to just the most effective ones. They're not really concerned with cost savings. Basically, Medicare encourages pharmaceutical companies and doctors to treat people a lot because that's how they get money as opposed to making people well. So you could look at some sort of policy that would tie Medicare funds to wellness, and that would have some marginal improvements. But the Republicans are absolutely right that you're not going to have major innovations in cost saving in healthcare outside of the private market. This is what's so threatening about large government involvement in healthcare. If you guarantee everyone some basic level, then you pretty much remove the ability of companies to go above and beyond that, and that crowds out innovation and really stifles it. And we've seen this across the board. We have education K through 12, it's all government funded pretty much, and it's rather poor. Our college education system has a lot more private funding, and it's the best in the world. So if you want long-term innovations in costs like we've seen in healthcare over the years, then that's going to come from private markets coming up with technological innovations, and you need to have a profit mechanism there to incentivize that. So we need to scale back government involvement and make sure that whatever program we do have is at least designed in a way that's meaningful so that we're aiming for wellness of our patients as opposed to just quantity of treatments and drugs.
I definitely agree with what Luke said about wellness. Scientists think that the person who's going to live to be 150 is alive right now. It could be me, it could be one of you. But we also have to look at the fact that Americans are guaranteed Medicare. I'm sure that your 90-year-old grandfather that was supposedly put in front of, a death panel, which is, by the way, not in Obamacare. That's a gross misunderstanding of what is in the bill. He probably had Medicare. and we can't take this away from American citizens. The way right now they're looking at taking the cost away is on the administrative side. It's already been cut about 2% on administration, which does of course cut into like it makes it slower for things to go through, which is a problem.
The other side of the Affordable Care Act, you guys missed that everybody's going to have to buy health care now. And you can buy it across state lines as well, so that's going to create a much bigger marketplace, right? So you have all these people who need a product now in a huge market. It's going to be competitive. It's going to bring costs down, right? We won't know until 2014 when it goes into effect, but that's capitalism 101, right? High demand, equal or smaller supply, costs are going to come down because it's a more competitive marketplace.
We'll go along with the 1 minute rebuttal from Ruth.
We agree that you need to make it more competitive. I'm not planning on living to under 50 based on my experiences at JMU, but I'm sure there's somebody out there who will. But because I'm not, I want a better quality healthcare system. I want companies that compete for my money and my illnesses, for lack of a better word. I want a lower cost, and that's what competition creates. And that's why we need a more competitive healthcare market.
The Affordable Health Care Act. What a great name. Because it's the exact opposite. It's driving the economy into the ground. Anytime when we've had a recession or depression or anything like that, there's been a sharp incline back into the GDP. Our GDP has been stuck at 2%. Because guess what? My father up there used to own a restaurant. And guess what? Burdensome regulations and taxes, they don't stimulate business. The only thing that stimulates business is to let people who earned that money and worked hard for it and played by the rules to spend that money and then to invest. The Affordable Care Act, they're just going to pay the penalty. Nobody's getting any insurance. Red Lobster's already doing it.
I just want to make a quick point that the Affordable Care Act includes some cost ratios affecting the price in the market, so there's no free market operating to tell you your price. And the policy mechanism they put in there is to prevent old people from being charged a lot more than young people, or how much the market would pay. Because typically your insurance price is going to be an estimate of how much medical care you're going to need. So young people oftentimes don't even have health insurance because they feel they don't need it. If they do, it's typically costs to go up very much in the next few years under the Affordable Care Act. If there are savings, and I don't think there are, they will be concentrated among the elderly who already receive the bulk of money that comes through entitlement programs.
And also, this question asked about how to improve the system without cutting the spending.
Oh, now I feel bad.
Cutting the spending, but reasonably, we can see that, we're going to have to cut the spending. It's way out of control, it's not sustainable, and so people are going to have to learn to save for healthcare on their own and not rely on government to save.
When you say that you want to make healthcare more competitive, I'm sure that Cole's 9-year-old grandfather and my grandfather, who was very ill before he passed away in December, they don't have the time, they don't have the ability to navigate a competitive healthcare system. They need something simple that they can just provide for them when they need it. They don't have the time to be looking into a competitive system like you say.
And another good point you made, Luke, I don't know if you realize this, you're saying there's going to be a lot more young people who are taking out health insurance now. And that's right. And it's very similar to how Social Security was when it was first set up. The idea is you have a lot of young people, you have more people paying into it than are taking out of it. So when you have all these young college grads who think they're healthy and strong and don't need health insurance, who don't have it now, they're going to be forced to buy it. So there's going to be more people paying in than there are taking out, or the same, because now we have an aging population. So it's going to balance out. The cost is not going to go up. It's like gas prices. It'll go up initially because of all these ridiculous projections, and then it's going to come back down. It's not going to happen overnight.
All right, and at this point, does anybody in the audience have a question concerning what either of the parties has said so far? You, sir.
I just have an unrelated question. All right. Basically, it seems like every party's operating under the assumption that there is a correct way to do policy. And yet, on every side, there's not just two, there's a lot of sides. There are intelligent, thoughtful, even, you'd say morally good people who disagree. So I just want to know, in your guys' opinion, why do you think that is? Why are political questions so notoriously difficult to have people agree on?
Wait, what that last part? Can you say it again?
There's a question.
Why are political... Basically, all right, in a nutshell, they're intelligent, morally good, thoughtful people on all sides of the issue, but yet all parties believe there is a right answer. So why are political questions so notoriously difficult to get agreement on?
All right, we'll begin with Madison Liberty this time. Sorry, we'll just move along.
I think that that is a great question. And that really points out the reason why we believe that there shouldn't be some government mandated system that said you must buy health insurance this way. We do believe that in this particular case, the states could be the laboratories of innovation and allow some states to have a more free market approach with competitive health care, and then some states to have government mandated health care and through those programs. And in the past, we've had that to some extent, though it's been stifled by rules about buying health insurance over state lines. But no, certainly I think that the fact that people disagree is a really good reason not to have whichever administration is in place at the time picking what everybody has to buy this time around and us footing the bill.
Yeah, I think people make a lot over the partisan divides in Washington and sort of gridlock that exists. And it's frequently cast in this narrative where we've grown farther apart over time. And that is, you can pretty much see that in the statistics that the viewpoints in Congress have gotten farther apart over time. But at the same time, Congress has gotten more representative. So I think what that tells us is that, I mean, the problem with politics is just that people have widely divergent views on these issues. And we're trying to balance how many different concerns, our respect for the rights of the individual, justice, equality, economic prosperity. So we're just trying to juggle so many different things, and everybody has skin in the game. I think that's why it's complicated. And when we can't come to agreement, I would reiterate Helen's point that it's oftentimes, I think, most moral and most appropriate to just step aside as a government and let people choose for themselves.
I don't believe that any party, Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Tea Party, whatever you want to be, I don't think anyone has the solution. I think we're all pieces to a puzzle, we just don't know what the picture is. I think the reason parties formed was because there were two separate opinions on many issues, and the idea was that these parties could work together to put out the best solution, because it's about compromise, is what politics is supposed to be about. But in recent years, especially since media has become so widespread, just think the last 100 years, from radio to TV, to the internet, to Facebook, to your cell phones, it's just people have become so polarized that nothing's going to get done. I don't think that any party has the answer, but I think the reason parties formed were so we could work together to come out with the best solution.
Yeah,
I'll answer your questions.
that's one of the things that's so great about the United States is that we have these freedoms, and one of them is the freedom of speech. That gives you, as an individual, the right to express your own opinion. And people find it convenient to do that through partisanship. And they express their opinion through whom they vote for. Hopefully, everybody goes out there, and not everybody does, but they vote for the person with whom they agree with most. And that's how you express your opinion. And has it turned into partisanship in the United States? Yes, but it comes from the basic root of the individual expressing their own opinion and the right to do so in the U.S. Constitution.
All jokes aside, I really do believe the Republican vision is the best vision. Because otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting up here today and defending all these things that I believe in, and many of you believe in as well. If we look back, we've always had partisanship. If you look, only 1/3 of the colonists fought for the American Revolution. They were only 1/3 was in favor of it. The other 1/3 was loyalist. And guess what? The other 1/3, they didn't even care. They weren't to be bothered. So that's why. Look right there. It's been going back since the beginning.
Your question, sir?
I just want to follow up on what he said. With all of these issues going on, and I'm disappointed with both sides, the Republicans and the Democrats. What do you think it would be, or would it help, if we had term limits and only let these people in Congress for a short period of time and got rid of all of the perks and the lifetime pension and the lifetime health care that gives the incentive for them to do whatever they have to do just to stay in office?
We need a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Not career politicians and bureaucrats like we have examples of all over on both sides of the parties. The Republican Party was founded on, and its backbone is for term limits and for limiting the bureaucracy and all. I mean, just look at the bureaucracy that's going on in Washington for the past over 200 years. until 2 weeks ago, we subsidized the U.S. Senate barbershop. $300,000 a year was the average that we subsidized the U.S. Senate barbershop. And half of them are bald, so I don't even know how many haircuts are these guys getting? The problem is this, the government has grown too big, and here's the thing, if you look at term limits is an area where we all can agree on. We all can agree on term limits. We need a government for the people and by the people of the people. If you look at the Occupy movement, they're not for career politicians. The Tea Party, they're not for career politicians. You have the Republicans, Democrats, Independents. No one wants to be told by a bureaucrat who thinks they're better than them to be able to make every life decision. We need term limits now, and especially here in the 6th District.
The problem is they make rules for themselves, so it's never going to change, so it should.
I mean, this is a really complicated question, and in my personal opinion, I mean, obviously, if you don't like your congressman, go out there and vote them out. That's a Democratic term limit. When we talk about, like other term limits, I really could care less. I mean, like, I live in the 6th District. I was born and raised in the 6th District. Bob would have been my congressman as long as I can remember. And I'm a Democrat. I don't really like him that much. But, the people keep voting for him. So they obviously think he's doing a good job. And I'm sure that if I want to be a politician, or if any of us sitting at this table want to be elected officials, that will be our position when we get into office. Because I'm pretty sure I would be pretty mad if I was doing a pretty good job and then had to get kicked out.
Yeah, it does seem unlikely, though, that the Republicans and Democrats who are in Congress right now are going to vote term limits on themselves or get rid of their pensions, even though it's probably what they should be doing. But at least we can hope that they would vote to end things like franking privileges and things like that now, which allows them to campaign on taxpayer dime.
That's not true.
Franking privilege is a privilege that allows people who are incumbents in Congress to send out mailers that are not explicitly campaign mail, but that have their name and their policies on them at the taxpayer expense, and postage is paid by taxpayers. And of course, in an election, having your name out there in publicity helps you in a campaign.
I also just want to say something about the Senate barbershop. It's not free. They have to pay for those haircuts, and they're pretty freaking expensive. So.
For just one rebuttal, that statement right there by the Democratic Party should just go ahead and tell you everything. They are for paying, your taxpayer dollars subsidize $300,000 a year average for Senate barbershops. Really? That's what the Democratic Party is for. They are for big government, and they just defended it, giving your taxpayer dollars, who your parents and you work hard for, away to senators and millionaires so they can get their heads shaved.
Our tax dollars also subsidize the oil company.
Oh, let's talk about corn and ethanol. And so, not to mention, with their term limits, which I like this guy up here, the term limits, what the problem is, we can look at the perfect administration, the Obama administration, with Solyndra. They've gone out and they've invested into the private industry, into the private sector, millions of dollars in green energy. Millions of dollars in green energy, and guess what? They failed. They go bankrupt. The government should not be picking winners and losers in the market, just like TARP with cash for clunkers and the bailout of Ford Motor Company. Let the private sector succeed and let the free market prosper.
So we shouldn't subsidize oil companies?
No, we shouldn't subsidize anything.
Does your party agree with that?
Most of them do.
I don't.
All right, this question wasn't on abortion, but as it is unlikely that people in Congress and in the Senate are going to vote themselves out of their put legislation in place that are going to kick themselves out of office. If you want to make a difference, you get out there and do that. We're all up here expressing our individual opinions. I know many of us have participated in campaigns. You want to get out there, talk to your friends, talk to your family, talk to people around you, and do what you can do.
All right, at this moment, I'm going to steer the debate away from this topic specifically. And we just received another question, namely, what are your thoughts regarding the drug war and the U.S. involvement directed at the Democrats, so you can begin.
The drug war is a colossal failure, and it needs to be ended immediately. Everyone can agree that it didn't work. It was it was appeasing the first lady at the time because it was her pet project, but it hasn't worked. If we want to actually solve the problems with drugs in this country, we need to go out.
Glad to hear you guys say that. I know that right now President Obama is not in favor of legalization of marijuana in any cases, I don't think, medicinally, and also he's not in favor of letting the states do what they want. His Justice Department wants to pursue the drug war in states that have popularly voted in favor of recreational marijuana use for people who choose to do so. But I think that you're absolutely correct. The drug war has totally failed. It's spent millions and millions of dollars, billions of dollars, with no results, overcrowded prisons, same amount of drug use overall. I mean, it's a classic example of why government intervention is not really the best way to solve any problem.
Didn't we learn our lesson from the prohibition of alcohol? I mean, people see the concerns about legalizing drugs typically are the health impacts and the violence people see around illegal drugs. But we saw violence around alcohol during Prohibition, and we don't see it now. People in Coors and Miller aren't shooting each other out because it's a legal market with legal businesses operating. So if you take away the drug war and you let businesses actually produce these products, then you will remove the violence on the streets that we see, and that's going to be the first really big gain. And then in terms of health, there's just really no evidence that the drug war has reduced people's usage. I mean, our rates of addiction have stayed pretty constant over the last century. So I definitely agree with the Democrats this was a failure. I don't think they had the right to do it in the first place. I think you have the right to decide what goes in your body. But now that it's been done, we can just make the purely empirical argument that it's been bad policy and it's hurt people more than it's helped.
We're going to have to agree that it has been a huge failure. We put a lot of dollars and haven't seen results. However, at the same time, it's not an issue of the federal government, as outlined in the Constitution. It's an issue of the state government. So states have the right to decide whether they want to make drugs legal or not.
So where do you draw the line? Should I be able to walk into CVS and buy Class 3 narcotics? Or are we just legalizing weed? I mean,
Yeah, I feel like if you want to talk about legalization of marijuana, we need a different question, because I was just talking about the drug war in general.
of the free market economy, right?
Yeah.
Where do we draw the line? I mean, we sell acid and cocaine and where?
Yes.
Where we draw the line?
Because again, the point is to say, does banning these things produce better outcomes for society? And we just have tons of empirical evidence that no, it doesn't.
So I should be able to walk into CVS and buy morphine.
If CVS wants to sell morphine that way, then yes.
I mean, they have it. They don't sell it.
I mean, I'm just saying it should be yours. It should be up to you and the producer that if that's the exchange you want to make, then you have the right to do that. I mean, it's your own body. The government should not have the ability to do things for your own good. The government is justified only in preventing you from harming other people. So they can have laws against drunk driving. Really, the law is, reckless endangerment. You can do stuff like that, yes. But you cannot wholeheartedly say, no, we can't sell this sort of thing.
You don't think that the government has the right to protect the security of their citizens, like, for themselves, like with, James going to buy acid, and they don't have the right to protect all of their citizens, even if it's from themselves?
No, I think you have a right to kill yourself if you want it. I mean, that would be an example. I don't think suicide should be a problem.
Okay,
Well, what we just heard from the Democratic Party again, they're saying this stuff. We're not. No one else is saying it. The quote was, "Government has the right." Is the government a person? I mean, who is the government? The government is an institution established by the people who have rights. The government doesn't have rights. We, the people, have rights. That's what the debate is about all over the nation. Is the government sovereign or are the people sovereign? That's what we're debating. I mean, that's what's being thrown around here today. The war on drugs, what Ken Cuccinelli, the governor, future governor, hopefully, of Virginia, current attorney general, has already stated the Republican Party is waiting to see what happens in Colorado and Washington with marijuana use. We can see what's going to happen and then take a step back, see what's going on. But the Republican Party isn't for anarchy. I mean, it isn't for total government control. The Republican Party is for liberty and having government where needed in small doses. Any reasonable person would not legalize heroin and seeing school kids shoot up heroin and have crystal meth, doing crystal meth on the street corners. We need to have good drug laws that are run by the state and that don't allow heroin, but marijuana, we'll see how that goes in Colorado and Washington.
Isn't that big government?
State government can be just as big as national government in this capacity. I mean, you're sitting here saying that state government is just as much and not a person as national government.
It is a right of it's a right of the state government according to the Constitution, which is what we run the United States by. States are similar to almost mini laboratories in the United States where we can see how an experiment goes in one state, and if it goes badly, then the people there can decide to outlaw it. That's how the United States works.
But meth or heroin is no more dangerous for someone in Arkansas than it is for someone in Mississippi.
And I would hope the people that Arkansas and Mississippi would see the sense in that and would not vote to make it legal.
Interrupting
That's
at
their
this point.
decision.
Interrupting at this point. You had a question?
No, it's fine.
Good. You had a question? You did?
So you're just talking about government have rights. I was curious, moving to another thing that has rights, Citizen United Corporation. What do you think about Citizen United?
You guys can start.
Okay, so Citizens United is something that people, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about out there. I find it helpful to look at the trial itself. And so the justices were questioning the Solicitor General, who is the guy who's defending the government position, saying, we're allowed to have this law that prevents private associations from making unlimited political expenditures, independent ones. So the facts of the case are, Citizens United was a group of 9 people that got together and made a movie about how much they don't like Hillary Clinton, and they wanted to distribute this movie through pay-per-view. Now to me, that's clearly protected speech. And Citizens United was the Supreme Court saying that's protected speech. And the principle that really is important here is one that the justices point out. They asked the Solicitor General, well, what if it wasn't a movie? What if you guys had written a book? Are you saying the federal government could say, no, because this book took money to print and took money to publish, and it was published by a corporation and not one individual, that suddenly the First Amendment doesn't apply to it, and now the government can prevent books from being published about politicians it doesn't like? And the Solicitor General, in answering the question, does this law say the federal government has the power to prevent books from being published it doesn't like? Answer, yes. To me, clear First Amendment violation. If I have a right to free speech, and Helen has a right to free speech, and we decide we want to join up together in a limited liability corporation and speak as one, we should have the same rights that we did as individuals. Married couples and corporations, it's the same sort of joint rights I'm talking about. I think Citizens United was an important case, a First Amendment case, and it was correctly decided.
So this relates back to what we were talking about earlier about how the Bill of Rights applies to U.S. citizens. A corporation, a business, an LLC, whatever you want to call it, is not a citizen, right?
Yes, but the Supreme Court has held that associations do not sacrifice all their rights when you join up with other people. Much like the College Democrats, you guys have the right to free speech. You're not a person.
Right, but
Isn't it good that you guys have the right to voice your views?
yeah, but you shouldn't be able to use unlimited funds to fund political campaigns.
What if George Bush had shut down The Daily Show? That's what that law would allow. Comedy Central, Viacom owns that show. They could have said, we don't like what Jon Stewart's saying. He's out of business.
No, but that's Jon Stewart. It's not Viacom. He's a
Viacom
citizen.
owns that show. That's how they would take
But
it.
But
It's
Viacom
not
can shut it down, the
Viacom's-
government can't shut it down, Viacom
It's
can.
not-
Viacom owns it.
It's not
The
Viacom
law-
speaking. It's Jon Stewart.
But it's with his money. So that
No, it's with his mouth.
the law that Citizens United struck down explicitly did include things like television shows that would be owned by Viacom. The New York Times, Washington Post, these are all entities that could be regulated under that law. It's just that the government knows not to mess with them because they would lose that battle so humiliatingly that they just point it at
Right.
interests that aren't able to defend themselves.
Moving on to what the Democrats are saying. If you still have something to add, or here, do you have anything to add on this debate? No? All right. I'm going to move on to a new topic here, another one of the questions that was posed. Namely, on a very hotly debated issue lately. What is your stance on the Second Amendment, and please explain how gun control has or has not helped cities such as Chicago?
Beginning with, do we get to start? Silence. Well, Democrats are like completely divided on this. We Democrats don't think that we believe in the Second Amendment, that people have the right to bear arms, like it's a Second Amendment. We agree with it. But there are certain places that guns, like college campuses, for example, it scares me to think that people could bring guns onto this campus that aren't trained to use them. Like, I don't know if any of you have like a weapons permit or anything like that, but I'm sure you, as a flat hat, there you go, you have a weapons permit. That's awesome. Good for you. Like, I'm glad that you know how to shoot a gun because I don't. But you don't have result in mass shootings like at Virginia Tech, you aren't going to be able to distinguish shooter. You act in fifth element. You're not going to be able to distinguish a shooter from a citizen. It's biggest case in Tuscan. That's exactly what happened. People had guns there and almost shot innocent people. Other than that,
we don't think people should have access to military-grade weapons, but they're used for, the only reason they're manufactured is to kill lots of people very quickly, and that's the only thing I think we see them used for. I don't know, like Newtown, Colorado, Arizona, Wisconsin, Oregon, just to name a few in the past year, 2 years, yes, I don't know, we don't support. And 70% of NRA members support background checks and ban five prosecution.
We believe that the Second Amendment needs to be upheld. We outlaw guns. Look at Mexico. Guns are illegal there, yet thousands of people still die each year in Mexico due to gang violence from guns. Making guns illegal is just going to place them more in the hands of the criminal and out of the hands of the victim. Somebody robs my house and they're taller and heavier than I am without a gun, I don't stand a chance. I would rather have a gun in my hands and know that I am safe.
The Second Amendment was put in the Constitution for a reason. Because let's go ahead and look at our history. Pol Pot, Joseph Stalin, Idi Amin, Castro, etc., all committed atrocities against their own people. The people had no chance to defend themselves. Gun control was pushed, and that's how they got their agenda through. We do have a president that I'm not linking to any of those leaders, but he is totally against the Second Amendment. And what is going on is just as you said, as my colleague down here at the end of the table said, she doesn't know in this room who has a gun and who doesn't. Well, you know why? Because guess what? Let me tell you a secret. Criminals don't register their guns. They're not going to come up and say, hey, I have a gun. Coming from inner city Norfolk, I understand that people that intend to do harm will do harm. Whether they do it with explosives, whether they do it with guns. The thing of it is, it's the Second Amendment right. It doesn't matter if you feel scared or who has training. Well, the police officer, if my mother was walking home from her job as a secretary at Old Dominion in Norfolk, Virginia, and she had to walk from the campus office to her parking lot in the parking deck, wouldn't you think a mugger would come up and, what is she supposed to do? Hit her with her keys? What is going on? I would rather my mother to be able to have a pistol on her and be able to defend herself than to be raped and murdered.
All right. First off, this idea that Barack Obama.
I'm
sorry, I thought you guys wanted.
Well, first of all, the question is specifically about Chicago, so I'll touch on that for a minute. Chicago had a citywide handgun ban that the Supreme Court struck down, and in the years since, their violent crime rate and their handgun violence rate have both fallen down a lot. So that's some empirical evidence that is out there on the table that handgun bans actually encourage crime by giving criminals the peace of mind knowing that their person they're going after doesn't have a weapon. So if you want to make the empirical claim, that's fine too. But also, I don't like this idea that you have to justify what everything you own is for to the government. And you see times and places where those military grade do have legitimate uses. When there were massive race riots in LA in the early 1990s, one of the few areas of Los Angeles that wasn't destroyed was a lot of the Asian sector towns because they had AR-15s. They didn't have handguns. So even when the cops weren't coming and the SWAT police weren't coming and there was gang violence, not one criminal, but a whole group of people, they were still able to defend themselves. So this idea that your right to defend yourself has to fit within what some politician can predict might probably happen to you or not is ridiculous. And your right to defend yourself should come first, and if you step over the line, we prosecute you later. And so far in American history, I think that's worked fairly well. Yes, we're a violent country, but I don't think it's all clear that the abundance of guns is the reason for that.
All right, this idea that Barack Obama hates the Second Amendment is ridiculous. He only passed 2 pieces of legislation in his entire presidency that dealt with guns. The first allowed you to carry a concealed weapon in a national park, and the second allowed you to bring a concealed weapon on an Amtrak train. So this idea is ridiculous. And to say that you don't have to justify a use for a gun to get a gun,